Today, our very own Chief Superintendent of Frontier School Division, Mr. Reg Klassen.
Thanks, Darren. I want to share with you something that has, over the course of time in education, become rather dear to me, and I continue to work at becoming better at practicing this in the job that I have. And so I hope that you'll find it also invigorating, at the very least something to think about in terms of how you go forward and do your work in education. And and I want to introduce to you the concept or the philosophy, the notion about servant leadership. And so that's where I want to take you today. In Manitoba, our current education system has made some significant strides in the delivery of education, or at the very least is working towards improving how public education is delivered. Some of the areas of focus are assessment, differentiated instruction, Aboriginal education, early childhood education, mental health, literacy, numeracy, treaty education, and this is only to name a few. There are, however, still many areas in education that we, in Manitoba, could give greater emphasis to, and I believe one of these is in the area of leadership. Now, I need to be careful here because it is misleading to give the impression there is nothing occurring regarding leadership development in Manitoba. Currently, Manitoba Education Partners are involved in a number of leadership initiatives. Manitoba Association of School Superintendents has just completed 5 years of an ethical leadership cohort and continues with their mentorship program for new superintendents. Manitoba School Boards Association continues to have at the top of their list the importance of school boards and the leadership role that they play in Manitoba. Some school divisions have started their own local leadership programs where aspiring administrators have the opportunity to study and discuss issues pertaining to school leadership. And some universities have discussed how they might offer leadership courses differently than current programming allows, demonstrated by greater flexibility in post-secondary education. Recently, the new administrative certification requirements were completed that involve numerous educational partners, and the not quite as new Manitoba Rural Learning Consortium that offers a leadership course for school administrators and school teachers. And I apologize because this list is not by any means exhaustive, but it gives you some indication that things are indeed going on. These initiatives will help improve educational leadership in Manitoba. However, if we are truly going to improve the public education system in Manitoba, it will require a more concerted effort towards leadership development. Michael Fullen, in his book, The Moral Imperative of School Leadership, states that to focus on leadership is integral to good education, and even more so for school improvement and system improvement. Leadership has become more demanding over the last while, particularly in education. Once sought-after leadership positions are now less attractive, and the candidate list is often shorter than it was before. Leaders are no longer seen as having all the answers, and if they do say that they have all the answers, they do not fare well when making that claim. Today, leaders need to have an understanding of power, collaboration, inclusiveness, human resources, sustainability, serving, regulations, the law, teaching, and learning. And this list is by no means exhaustive. To that end, I propose we consider servant leadership that has, in my opinion, a great deal to offer leadership in public education system and the way leaders should consider leading. Throughout history, there have been notions about good leadership, but more particularly in the last century, a number of theories have been put forward. The great man theory states that leaders were born and not made. Turns out that's not true. The trait theory suggests leaders had a unique set of traits and brought about their success. The situational leadership theory states that leaders alter approaches based on the situation. In spite of what is currently understood about leadership, there still exists today a belief that if a person has fought and clawed their way to the top of the ladder, they must deserve to lead. Or if they've been promoted because of their outstanding work, they deserve to lead. Another commonly held belief assumes that a person can lead, should be leading, or should have first opportunity to lead because they have the most education. This, combined with a society that sees individualism as important, with the notion of looking after self ahead of others, often leaves us short on good leadership. Margaret Wheatley, in her book, The Servant Leader, From Hero to Host, refers to the myth of individualism that separates us from each other and leaves us indifferent to each other's presence. Our modern day use of technology does substantiate this point of view on a number of levels. Servant leadership, I believe, holds a solution that will take us beyond these theories and beliefs as we serve each other toward reaching a common goal. Servant leadership begins with serving, and in that serving, it is more about who the individual leader is as opposed to credentials or their ability to influence others. Robert K. Greenleaf, the author of Servant Leadership, states that true leadership emerges from those whose primary motivation it is to have a deep desire to help others. Exactly a week ago today, I was in a second-year education class, and I was talking to the second-year education students, and when I shared that with our oftentimes humorous secretary-treasurer, he said immediately, "Ask them why education, why not the trades? There's more money in the trades." So I did. I took that opportunity and I asked those teachers, why education? Why would you be here? You're not going to make any money doing this. You're not going to get wealthy. I said, you've got defined holidays and you pay big money to go anywhere on those defined holidays. Why education? Why not the trades? They looked back at me, all 30-some students, with this kind of look in their face that kind of told me that, are you nuts? They were resolute in what they wanted to do as teachers. And throughout the course of the next hour and a half, it became apparent that they had a desire to make things better for others, and they felt that through teaching, working in education, they would have that opportunity. I believe that servant leadership addresses a general void that currently exists in educational leadership. First, this void is created by a system that is often top-down and falls short of being collaborative. Servant leadership seeks to involve others in decision-making, giving voice to those who are being served and being led. This collaborative style is inclusive, from students to trustees, from parents to teachers, all promoting a sense of community. Second, our current educational system is based and designed on the Industrial Revolution model, which taught us to view people as objects that we can direct. Perhaps this is an oversimplification, but what servant leadership provides is the opportunity to view employees and students as future servant leaders, and not objects that need to accomplish something by a certain time frame. As I stated earlier, the theory of servant leadership was introduced by Robert K. Greenleaf in a little essay entitled "The Servant as Leader." Greenleaf wrote that the servant leader is servant first, a natural feeling that one wants to serve first, and then conscious choice brings one to aspire to lead. When we think of servant leader, we are confronted with two diametrically opposed terms, servant and leader. Terms that our society finds difficult to embrace in one concept. Greenleaf believed that the servant-leader philosophy helps build a community and is motivated to make life better for all its members because of a trusted, believed-in common vision. This is accomplished through serving and leading, carried out by the members of that particular community. Greenleaf believes the way to discern between servant first and leader first is to know that the difference manifests itself in the care taken by the servant first to make sure that other people's highest priority needs are being served. The best test, but difficult to administer, is, do those being served grow as persons? Do they, while being served, become healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, more likely themselves to become servants? And what is the effect on the least privileged in society? Will they benefit, or at least, will they not be further deprived? Thomas Sergiovanni, in his book Moral Leadership, Getting to the Heart of School Improvement, shares the story of Madeline Cartwright and describes her as a leader who will do whatever it takes to make her school work well. In another story of Larry Norwood, Sergiovanni states that Norwood's style is to delegate and empower, and suggests Norwood's success may well be because he implicitly rejects leadership as we now understand it. Serving in servant leadership. As has already been stated, the whole premise of servant leadership is based on a belief that one needs to serve first. Servant leadership can only be practiced by serving others, about paying attention to others and treating them right based on group purpose and core values. Based on group purpose and core values. That theme will emerge throughout, and I want you to keep that in mind. Group purpose and core values. This is to everyone's advantage, particularly those for whom one is responsible as servant leader. Serving is caring, and it is in this context of caring for each other that one acts, and this action creates community. Sergiovanni says that community is connectedness, similar to a family or another closely knit group. From this, it can easily be argued that service legitimizes leadership because this is what builds the social fabric. Added to the notion is the fact that serving is a natural, moral desire that is recognized as important by the world's religions and numerous important thinkers. Serving makes for a better society and a better life for everyone. Margaret Wheatley would agree and states that one of the major difficulties with our society is that we currently live and accept the belief that we're in it for ourselves. She makes the case that we have need for each other and that together we are the best resource to go into the future. It could be argued that the belief that called you to be a servant leader is the belief of who we are as a species. And for both those who are being served and those who are serving, builds relationships that in our world offer meaning and hope. Serving, then, in the context of true servant leadership, will help guide our future as a human species. Leadership in servant leadership. Leadership, when studied closely in the theory of servant leadership, is not much different from serving, because in order to be a leader, one must be a follower first. I think we can all agree that position and personality is not enough to be a leader. Rather, the true leader is one who must follow first. This is based on the premise that followership emerges when leadership is based on compelling ideas. This is a challenge for most systems and institutions, particularly so for educational system, with regards to the traditional hierarchy of school system. This is difficult, even upsetting, because positional leaders are not at the apex. Rather, ideas and values have that position. You need to repeat that. Positional leaders are not at the apex. Ideas and values have that position. What are the ideas and values of our system in Manitoba? Sometimes these are lost in the rhetoric and the politics that seem to be rampant at all levels. Compelling ideas provide direction as outlined by the leader. Greenleaf would say that the mark of a leader, an attribute that puts them in a position to show the way for others, is that they are better than most at pointing the direction. People feeling connected to each other emerge as an important aspect of leadership, similar to the aspect of serving. It is important to understand that leadership must touch people differently to make a difference, that it taps their emotions, appeals to their values, and responds to their connections with other people. Important to remember is that leadership is not about the power of the individual, but rather the good of all. Leadership, in the philosophy of servant leadership, cannot be designed into a formula or a model that potential servant leaders can follow. It is clear that leadership takes many forms in servant leadership, and important to remember that ideas and values lead, not individuals. For the individual leader, in the context of servant leadership, there is a transition from management to leadership. This transition is a shift from the individual form, external, doing the right thing, to internal, external, doing things right, to the internal, doing the right thing. The answers rest within you, and the effectiveness of the tools depends not on the tools themselves, but on how the leader uses them. And each leader comes with a different set of tools and uses them to serve first. At some point, they will make the conscious choice to lead, guided by ideas and values. Servant leadership and power. Power is always equated with leadership, and it is often thought that leadership cannot occur without power. Servant leadership reverses this thinking and asks the individual to serve first. The servant leader, rather than embarking on a quest for personal power, embarks on a quest to identify and meet the needs of others. A person's servanthood is ultimately tested wherever one is with one's power. Fullen believes that the primary moral test is what one does when one's power, particularly in those places where one's power is the greatest. Power is only a tool, and most often it is not the most important one. In the end, leaders who seek power become irrelevant because they focus on what they want instead of what other people need. Greenleaf states that we can use power inappropriately, and it becomes coercive when we assume that some individuals know what another ought to learn, or are justified in imposing that judgment. He continues by saying that it does not end there, that the system is also coercive, in that we make schooling compulsory. And we continue with credentialing at high school and post-secondary levels, leaving our students generally as the weakest partner in education. If we believe that an institution is strongest when all the parties have adequate power for the role, it is the weakest where one or more of the elements has too little power, because when somebody has too much and the corrupting influence of power is moving toward absolute. In order to avoid the state of absolute power, the servant leader will always ask what is the right thing to do in any given situation. I need to just stop there and make sure that you're thinking about what I just said, because our institutions, we assume that everybody should go to school. And we assume that we know what they should learn, and we very often have described how they should learn it. And the people who we are assuming this about have very little say. And if we believe in equity or equality, and if we think that we want to serve as servant leadership, then we need to think a little bit differently about that, because we as educators often assume we know. And we need to be mindful of that, because the system tells us that we have that power. And we then take that power, and we need to be careful of what we do with that. Boards, by their design, are not top-down in structure. Each trustee holds equal power, and that power is usually exercised only when the whole board is in session. This structure, often described as a flat structure, is designed to encourage reflection and the voicing of diverse viewpoints in an effort to see the whole picture. However, regardless of the structure at the board table or in a school, powerful leaders often assume too much responsibility, causing other members to back off from assuming their responsibility, ultimately undermining servant leadership. And we have numerous examples in our province about where the loudest voice has undermined the structure of deep reflection and seeing the whole picture. It is clear that for servant leadership, the misuse of power is the most dangerous aspect of leadership. If they do possess power, those servant leaders, it is because they have had it given to them by those they serve, and this power should play only a small role. The irony is that often more power is given to those who, as demonstrated by their actions, understand more clearly the idea of serving. Servant leadership is teaching and learning. Servant leader teachers often need to find a balance in their lives because they run the risk of extending themselves beyond their limits. Teachers that are really good and or very caring want to take on too much and Part of the servant leader's responsibility is not to let that happen, while at the same time not repressing their ambition. But teachers need to do the same thing for their students in their classroom, because they too are servant leaders. In speaking to that second-year class of education students, I said to them, well, you have two choices. If you're here because you really care, then what will happen is that when you get into this profession, you will have your heart broken. Because if you care about your students, you will come across, maybe on a yearly basis, maybe only once or twice in a decade, but you will come across that student that simply breaks your heart. Because you, no matter what you try, you are unable to reach them, help them to learn in the manner that you feel that they can, and you will lie awake at night with a broken heart trying to figure out. It's okay, it's much easier if you don't care, because then you can blame them, you can blame their parents, you can blame the system because you have this makeup of students in your class. But if you truly care, then you will have your heart broken. And that's part of leading or serving and leading in the fabric of being human. Part of being a servant leader is the ability to listen. Teachers need to listen to their students and listen carefully, not only to understand them, but to better understand themselves as teachers. Listening helps to accomplish what Fullen refers to as the teacher we need, because these teachers are immersed in disciplined, informed, professional inquiry and action that results in raising the bar and closing the gap by engaging all students in learning. Modeling how to be a servant leader in the midst of error for students. Let me begin again. Modeling how to be a servant leader in the midst of error for others, in this case students, is important because it suggests that people, in this case teachers, apologize when things go wrong, whether real or perceived by others. It is important to remember that, as adults, we have a great deal of impact on these young lives. What we model as teachers is important and often has lasting effect. We need to question the notion of that wherever there is a helper, in this case the teacher, who presumes to know more of what is best for the recipient, in this case the students, then that recipient might know for themselves, and if the situation is coercive, either overtly or covertly, then the potentiality for evil is there. And I think the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the information we have there is one of the best examples of what can happen. Not to say in any way that that's the best of anything. The issue is, at what point should teachers stop assuming they know what is best for their students? And how coercive is this in education? True servant leaders are not focused on control nor focused on compliance. Rather, they are focused on coaching and mentoring. Servant leadership as collaboration. Collaboration would seem to be an automatic action that is required in servant leadership. Collaboration infers that the leader and the followers form a change partnership, with each side being aware of the intentions of the other. Collaboration includes conflict, and the challenge for the servant leader is to try to prevent disagreement about ideas or process or product from degenerating into personal conflict. However, conflict will not be dealt with appropriately without a level of trust. Collaboration requires a level of trust from all parties, but it begins with the servant leader, because people grow taller when those who lead them empathize and when they are accepted for what they are. The servant leader creates a hospitable space where thoughtful reflection can occur and where people can collaborate without fear. It is in this context into which staff members bring their experienced wisdom about priority issues and trends. It is within these boundaries that both staff and trustees work collaboratively in the organization's priorities. In his book, Leaders Eat Last, Simon Sinek speaks about the leader creating a circle of trust. At first I thought the book was just, leaders eat last, so I started going to the buffet last, but nothing changed. So I read the book. And what he talks about in that book is that leaders must create a circle of trust. And he said, at what point did it become acceptable for leaders to look after themselves and their shareholders using human beings as the change for saving money? So we dropped 900 employees because we need to make sure the shareholders get their profits. At what point did that become acceptable? And in his book, he actually thinks he has a point in history when that started to take place. If we look at salaries of CEOs in major companies, we will see that they make hundreds of more dollars than their workers in the store. And Walmart is a good example. Servant leadership as inclusiveness. A new level of inclusiveness has changed the education scene in Manitoba with the passing of the Appropriate Education Act, which is more in line with servant leadership. The servant always accepts and empathizes, never rejects. And that the acceptance of the person, though, requires a tolerance of imperfection, each person has the right to an inclusive organization, and leaders must work to make these rights real. Servant leadership as citizenship. A servant leader must have the ability to remain detached in the midst of a busy life, allowing them to see their peculiar assortment of obligations and responsibilities. Servant leaders are not givers of solace, but rather disturbers and awakeners. This notion indicates we have a voice as a citizen, and to that end, a servant leader is not quiet, but speaks to issues, a responsibility that is taken seriously. Greenleaf believes true citizenship is best carried out through servant leadership because when strong natural leaders do not lead or choose to follow a non-servant, society suffers. It is in the educational system we have our greatest opportunity to teach the true meaning of citizenship. Fullen says that the best case for public education has always been that it is a common good. The quality of public education system relates directly to the quality of the life that the people enjoy, whether as parents, employers, employees, citizens, etc. With a strong public education system as the cornerstone of a civil, prosperous, and democratic society. In closing, I would like to leave you with these thoughts. The difference in servant leadership manifests itself in the care taken by the servant first to make sure that others, people's highest priority needs are being served. The best test, and difficult to administer, is, do those served grow as persons? Do they, while being served, become healthier, wiser, freer, more autonomous, more likely themselves to become servants? And what is the effect on the least privileged in society? Will they benefit, or at least not be further deprived? Thank you. If you'd like to know more about servant leadership, the website is Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership, www.greenleaf.org. And there are almost a dozen characteristics of what makes up servant leadership. And I didn't have time to get into those, but that too is riveting. Are there any questions?
You're good.
That's a statement, thanks.
You got any questions up here? No one's tearing. You got questions? Okay.
Good, that means I was very clear. Okay, thank you again.